Mainly what you want to think of is in terms of a scale in a linear fashion. Instead of playing, let's say, a pentatonic scale like going across like you would play when you're fingering it, right now we're going to look at playing that on one string up and down. Let's start with a D note, the D note on the 3rd fret of the B string. So we're going to look at a couple different scales for D. We're going to look at a D minor pentatonic, a D major pentatonic, a D major scale, and then we're going to look at 2 modes of the major scale quickly. We're going to look at a Lydian mode and a Mixolydian mode. So without getting deep into the theory of that, basically they're going to just be other scales played from the perspective of D. The point is, when we look at it linearly, it's just going to be changing a half step somewhere to get a particular type of sound, and I'll explain what each would be used for. So let's start off with the pentatonic scales. Pentatonic is a 5-note scale. Looking at how a minor pentatonic works linearly is going to have the first to the second note will be 1.5 steps, or 3 frets. To the next note will be a whole step, another whole step, another 1.5 step jump, and then finally a whole step to get back to an octave of where we started. So if I did that pattern, 1.5 steps, whole step, 1.5 steps, whole step, starting on any note, I could start on this note, I'm going to have the minor pentatonic of that. So once we practice this to this D note on the B string, practice moving it around to other strings, get to know the pattern up and down. So once again, we'll start on D, and what we want to make sure that we're intonating that D note and it's in tune, not pressing too hard, and muting out with this hand. So I'm just basically going to use my first finger to pluck that B string. So I'm going to pick it and go up 1.5 steps to the 6th fret. Now we're going to pick that and we're going to go up a whole step. Pick it again, go up another whole step. Pick it again, go 1.5 steps again. And then finally one more whole step and we're back to D. So the way that would sound together. Now practice it also going down. Now what I would also suggest doing is not only practice letting the slide travel from note to note, but practice playing them in a more staccato manner, where I'm plucking it and then muting it right away, just to gain control of that sound. So I can either have or and practice going up and down, like I said. And once you're feeling comfortable with that, move around. Try just jumping around that pattern, and then move it to another key. Try it starting on another note. Find an E note if you want to play it to an E minor pentatonic or an A note. Just get to know that scale in a linear fashion. Okay, now the major pentatonic is going to be another 5-note scale. It's basically a major scale with 2 notes taken away. The nice thing about pentatonics is that they can be placed over songs, blues songs, different things, which actually don't stay in one diatonic key. In other words, a place where a major scale just doesn't fit all the way through, where, let's say, one chord has an F note, one has an F sharp. If you have a pentatonic scale that doesn't have an F note or an F sharp note at all, you can play around it without ever hitting a conflicting note. Not saying that's the best way to play always, because there's a lot of times where hitting those other chord tones would be good, but that's why pentatonics are so widely used in blues, and it's a lot easier to place. So looking at a major pentatonic and the intervals that it contains, from the D note we do a whole step to another whole step, then we have that 1.5 steps, another whole step, and then that final 1.5 steps. So from D it's going to go 3rd fret to 5th to 7th to 10th to 12th, back to the 15th, which is now an octave higher than we started. So that sounds like. So do the same thing that we talked about with the minor pentatonic, just practice playing that. Practice starting and jumping up to the note and stopping when you get right above the fret and you feel like you're in tune. And practice kind of jumping around, but it's a great warm-up. If you want to take this a step farther, I'll give you quickly a couple other scales that people would typically use. A major scale is just going to be a whole step, then a half, and then 3 whole, 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 and then another half. So whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. The other two I mentioned, the Mixolydian and the Lydian, you want to think of starting from the perspective of this major scale. The Mixolydian is a major scale that has slightly bluesier characteristic. It has a flatted 7th note. So if we went through those from the 1st to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th note, that last half step back to the root, we would actually play that a half step lower. We'd play a flatted 7th, so it would actually be whole, whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole. So the difference is just whether I'm playing the last note half step away from the root or a whole step away from the root, which is bluesier sounding. Very often when somebody's playing like a major sound but something with a bluesy twinge, this is the scale they're using. And thinking of it linearly with a slide is good practice. The Lydian scale, again, this is kind of jumping forward theory-wise, but if you want something that's often used, I know Derek Trucks will use these kind of sounds a lot. The Lydian scale is just like a major scale, but the 4th note, that 4th note, 1, 2, 3, 4, is actually a half step up. So it's whole step, whole step, whole step, half, whole, whole, half. So it's 1, 2, 3 in the 4th. Instead of being a half step, 1, 2, 3, 4. So to D, it would be 3rd fret, 5th, 7th, 9th, 10th, 12th, 14, 15. I'll show you how that would sound. That right there, that's the note that's really the defining character of that scale. If you hear it, I'm going to let a D note kind of drone in the background so you can hear how that would sound against that. So it's got a very cool tension to it on that 4th note. Whether you just want to start with the minor pentatonic and that's enough for you to get used to this, that's totally fine. The main thing is just practicing getting used to these linear movements on one string, and that you have your right and left hand technique comfortable, and take it slow, like everything when it's new. The beginning is the hardest part. So that covers looking at scales linearly on one string. Now, the next thing that you want to get the hang of is, obviously, you don't want to always just have to travel on one string and create your melodies on one string, especially when there's these really big interval jumps. You know, sometimes it's nice to be able to go jump between strings, right? As you would playing guitar generally. Okay, so the basic idea of this technique, going between strings, what we want to do is, let's say I want to go from a note from the B string to the E string and back. So I'm playing the 9th fret on the B to the 7th of the high E. I'm muting these notes with the bottom of my thumb, and I'm picking with my thumb that B string. And then let's say I want to pick with my first finger on the high E string. Okay? Now if I was playing this with my left hand, if I wanted the notes to ring out, I could just playing like that. If I wanted to mute them, I could lift them off with my left hand. so I have shorter duration notes. Can't really do that as well with the slide. So what we have to do is rely on our right hand to shorten the notes when we want them shortened. So the trick is, what I want to do is when I pick this note with my thumb, and then I go to the next note with my first finger, I want my thumb to return and silence the B. And vice versa, when I pick with my thumb, I want my first finger to return and silence the E. Instead of hearing them ringing out like this, what I want is, as I hear the next note, that first note should silence, and so forth. So it'll sound like this. I'll do it in slow motion. I'm exaggerating the right hand technique there to show the pattern, but the idea is now putting the slide on, you can try it on one string or one fret, but the way to know if you're really getting it is by moving the slide back and forth. So what I want to hear is this 9th fret and this 7th fret, where the slide is going to be traveling 2 frets back and forth. You'll know if you're doing this right, because what you don't want to hear is this. Right? But what do you want to hear is this. So start off really slow. So you want to make sure it's going to be tricky to get the hang of it first. Once you get it, just practice it really slow. Once you get it, you'll have it for good. It's like anything, but it's just the muscle memory right now. So just practice back and forth. You know, and you'll know if it's right because you're not hearing this. Okay? So that's the real trick in getting used to slide crossing strings, is learning this muting technique. In other words, like a riff like this. If I went straight across the 9th fret, and I'm just picking straight across the 9th on the D, G, and B strings, but then let's say I wanted to go up a half step on the B string and back down. Works just fine if I mute with this hand. If I don't, it does this. And everything goes up because all those strings are ringing out. So what I do is, as I travel across, once I get to the B string, these 2 fingers are going to go back into position to mute out the D and the G. So again, just take it really slow. Make sure those get muted out. And then when you travel up, you'll only hear that one note. Okay, so that's really where you want to start. You just want to work on linear scales and also this technique between the 2 strings. Once you get the hang of it, you know, you can work on putting it together. In other words, if you're doing, let's say, this pentatonic scale that we started with, if I could go 3, 6, 8, 10, 13, 15, and instead of going up to the 18th fret there, what I could do is grab that note 5 frets down on the high E string, or in other words, the 13th fret there, so it would sound like this. So that's adding these patterns together, getting used to doing that. Okay? There's so many great songs to practice out there and learn. One of my favorite slide players is George Harrison. A good starter one that actually uses these single note lines on one string, but is crossing strings. And the end of the line, there's a harmony part, but even if we just learn a single part of that melody, the slide part to My Sweet Lord, which is in the key of E, they're playing F sharp minor B, it's 2-5, 2-5. Then when the verse comes in, it's over this E major to C sharp minor. But just to learn that slide part, it goes like this. It's the 16th fret, 14th to the 12th on the high E, then back to 14, 12. Now 12, 14, 12. So 12, 14 on the B. But then we have to jump down to the 12 of the high E. So in slow motion, that's going to go like this. Now after that E note right there, we have to move back up to the 14th fret, but now play the B string. So that's where we have to get this right hand muting going. So it's without that muting, it would sound like, right? So here it is again. And from there, we stay on the B string, move down and play 12, 14. Now we go back down to 12, but this time to the E string. So again, we have to move down, mute the B string, and pick the high E. So and then back to the B. So again, muting the high E. So it's all between the 16th on that first note. Everything else is between 14 and 12. So practice that really slow. And just repeats that. The next little section does a little diminished arpeggio from that same, which is down, starting again on the 16th fret, but going down 1.5 steps, or 3 frets every time. 16, 13, 10, to 7. And that's 9, 9, 7 on the high E, and then 9, 7 on the B. But again, we have to do that muting. It's definitely trickier than it seems, when you're first getting started. But it's a great little melody to maybe get under your hands. Practice it super slow. Of course, there's plenty of songs out there if that one doesn't suit you. But that might be a good starter to get used to both the single note lines mixed with crossing strings.